The question on everybody's mind, was Bama robbed? No.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with this, the greatest sport on planet Earth, no matter how confusing or crazy it is. This episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, where you can get a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lots of playoff talk because the playoff has problems. Alabama not getting in isn't one of them. We'll talk about them. And Purdue's got their new head coach. What is Barry Odom walking into? Brian Smith, Seminoles, and our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network. Let's hop into this playoff talk. This is all the rage, all the buzz. Bama can't believe it. The SEC fans are upset. They've only got 3 teams into the college football playoff. Meanwhile, the Big 12 is happy to just have gotten one that is actually getting a first round bye. Shout out to the Clemson Tigers for that. But where I came down, Brian, on the side of Alabama should not be in the playoff is not just that they lost 2 weeks ago to Oklahoma. They win that game, I'll give you Bama into the playoff at 10-2 over SMU 11-2. I wouldn't have a huge problem with that. I really wouldn't. But 9-3, it's not just that they lost to Vanderbilt. It's not just that they got blown out by Oklahoma. It's that both happened. I think that's what it came down to here. I agreed with the committee's decision. I'm not generally, though not exclusively, a huge fan of punishing teams for making the conference championship game. I think they did the right thing.
I don't have a problem with Alabama being left out either because they didn't even show up in the Oklahoma game. Like, if you watch any of that, they give up 205 yards in the first half just on the ground to a team that didn't know what the forward pass was. So, I mean, you could put 8 in the box, and they still couldn't stop them. Backup quarterback, the whole 9 yards. They didn't even want to be there. So that wasn't an issue of Alabama having more talent. That was an issue of Alabama not caring. I don't want teams that don't care to be in the college football playoff.
Yeah, and 68 yards passing was the number for Jackson Arnold, who was the starter, but then got benched, then got reinserted. Like 68 yards passing for a double-digit win, that's a serious defensive problem. Vanderbilt, 40 points put up by Diego Pavia and the Commodores. That's a serious problem. Like, I understand the argument for getting Bama into the playoff. Well, they've got all these ranked wins. One of those is Missouri, and I'm sorry, I don't count that. I do not count that.
Missouri's just in there because they had to fill out the bracket.
Exactly. Missouri makes me want to take the top 25 and make it a top 20 so that we don't put in teams that are just in there because, well, you know, they've got a really good record and whatnot. Like, what's the big difference between Missouri and Duke? Those are both 9-win teams. I don't think either one is great. I don't think either one is terrible. In fact, I know that they're not. But that's one of Alabama's, really, really high-quality wins. But the logic that the playoff committee uses, it's often inconsistent. I don't think I'm breaking news to anybody there. There's a subjective component to it. And Ole Miss Lane Kiffin is out there lobbying for Ole Miss, saying they should have done this, that, and the other thing. And I again come back to it's very reminiscent of a specific game to me, Brian, in which the officials make an impactful call and you can readily argue it's the wrong one. By letter of the law, maybe it isn't, but you got to be able to, just one of those calls in the game. And I go back to, were there any other moments that you could have actually controlled to not put it in the officials' hands? Because that's the problem you have when you make so many mistakes. When you lose to Kentucky, when you lose to Vanderbilt, when you lose to Oklahoma, when you lose to Florida, you allow the committee the opportunity. And you had the chance. You had every opportunity, Alabama and Ole Miss, to not give the committee this chance to exclude you from the playoff. But you didn't hold your own. I often say help is given to those in college football, most often to those who hold their own, and these two teams didn't, which is why I'm not up here feeling sorry for them.
I think the one thing we can take away from the committee this year, because I'm piggybacking off you, teams that are up and down, as Dick Vitale used to say, Dow Jonesers, they don't like them. They want to see consistency. Losing to Oklahoma, losing to Florida, losing to Kentucky at home, those kinds of losses to the committee are catastrophic. Why? Well, those teams are not in the playoff.
And they're not close to it either.
I mean, it's like SMU's schedule wasn't great by any means. That their schedule worked out for them, but they didn't screw up either. I mean, Bama's schedule, I mean, they had Georgia and they beat them. Okay, well, after they won that, what do you think their chances of not making the playoff were? 5, 10%? Well, that's how bad they were in their losses.
Correct.
I mean, it's just, there's no way they should have done that. But again, mentally, that team was a roller coaster. And the playoff committee wants to see teams in every game, brand or not, that are competitive. How do you know, even in a playoff game, that Bama would be competitive, show 100% effort? They haven't shown it this year, even in Southeastern Conference games. I mean, I would assume they'd give everything in a playoff game, but their playoff life was on the line against Oklahoma, and they scored 3 points. Why do I care to discuss it more if I'm the committee? I would have lost my mind watching that game as a committee member because you had to erase a whole bunch of stuff because I'm sure they had them penciled in. But then at that point, you're like, oh, boy, what do we do with Alabama?
Yeah.
I mean, oh, come on. I saw Oklahoma play live this year.
They're not good. They were not good.
It's painful to watch their offense.
It's terrible.
I'm not picking on, but they had like 5 receivers out, Spencer. There's no chance you should give up 200 yards rushing to them in a game. They gave up that in less than a half. I have no pity for Alabama.
Yeah, and I like what you brought up about the consistency point because SMU, because they were playing, was at the forefront of everybody's mind. But their schedule and Indiana's schedule, very similar. Very similar. You don't have a high strength of schedule, but you don't have any bad losses in there. Indiana's loss is by 23 to Ohio State, and Ryan Day ran it up at the end. That's Indiana's only loss of the season. I frankly think Indiana has a case for a home playoff game. What's the difference? What's the major difference, Brian, between Indiana and Notre Dame? They're both 11-1. Who's got the better loss? It's Indiana by a mile. It is not even close. It's not even close. But Indiana has to go on the road for their playoff game. Why? Because they have an IU logo on the side of their helmet. Kurt Cignetti was railing against that, and I think he's absolutely right.
I think it's a little different than that. Their offensive line was annihilated in the Ohio State game. They had a touchdown drive to start, and
Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois.
They've also won their last 10 games and averaged win by like 30 points a game.
Still Northern Illinois.
I know it's weird. Notre Dame's a really hard team to grade because Florida State obviously bombed and USC didn't end up being what we thought, but they played pretty decent against Notre Dame. Their schedule just fanned out. On the other side, Indiana, when you look at like their Ohio State, Michigan, those are the 2 toughest defenses they played. They combined for 397 yards of total offense in those games. That hurt them. Their eye test did not look good in the biggest stages. And let's be honest, the committee was not watching Indiana the first few games of the year.
No, they were not. So they probably, I think that's a good way of looking at it, is the late season bias, I think, came into play. I mean, you 100%. Saw that in the discussion around South Carolina. Well, South Carolina, they should be able to get in the playoff. And it's like, hey, guys, I watched them play Ole Miss. I watched them play Alabama. They're in the same conference. They've got the same record. This is not going to happen. South Carolina fans didn't like me telling them that a couple weeks ago on the show, but that's how it was always going to play out. I agree with the late season momentum. I do think they like the hot teams. I mean, this is why BYU
trend. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is why BYU got zero consideration. I mean, less than Miami even as an at-large team because they were losing at the end of the year. Miami lost last week of the regular season and 2 weeks before that. BYU lost 2 weeks in a row at the end of the season. So I think that absolutely matters. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter. We got more playoff matters to discuss because this 12-team format, for all the positives it brings, there are some serious negative drawbacks, and I'm not talking about who was left in and who was left out. How do we fix this? Brian and I are going to do that next. First, let's talk about Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with the promo code College. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. Go to Omaha Steaks and check them out. How do we fix the college football playoff? Brian Smith and I are continuing on to solve that. So there are a lot of different angles. Here's the number one angle I go at first, Brian, to fix the 12-team playoff. You got to reseed in the second round. There is no team that had a worse weekend with playoff draws than Oregon. No team. Oregon is the only unbeaten in all of college football. They win the Big Ten. They're the number one overall seed. They have the toughest path to the championship game. It's not even close. There's not a close second that is comparable to the lineup of teams Oregon is likely to have to go up against. Now, college football chaos can absolutely ensue, but you look at that and their first game is going to be either Tennessee or Ohio State. Compare that to Penn State, who they just beat. Penn State gets a home game against SMU, and then in the second round, they get Boise State. That's where my mind goes first to fix the 12 team. Where do you go?
With that, I'll say that if there's zero chance it'll happen, and unfortunately, this is why they're selling tickets for all the games in advance because of travel for fans and all that. There's zero chance that's going to happen because if you announce after the games, it's less than a week for flights and stuff. It's too expensive. There's just no chance that's going to happen. I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that's how the fans are going to look at it, and that will tick off advertisers. If you tick off advertisers,
well, I don't know that you tick off advertisers as much. If not as many people go to the game, more people are watching on TV.
No. I'm talking about the advertisers like the airlines, talking about the people that spend on hotels. All that.
If the airlines want people to travel, then don't gouge them on the prices.
Well, I mean, that part of that is the hotels do that, but like I already listened to this from somebody else and they're right. I don't have a problem with what you're saying, but that's just not going to happen. I'm just telling you, if they think there's a chance they lose 28 cents, there's no chance it'll happen. Money is the end all be all in our society.
That's just it's just unfortunate that you had Oregon fans going into that game thinking, "Hey, maybe we should lose. Let's lose." That should never exist. You should never want that as a sport, right? The reason not in the postseason structure in the NFL, it works because hey, let's tank. We want to get this quarterback that's coming out of college. You know, we want Shador, we want Cam Ward, whoever it is. That's different. You don't want to go into these games and be rewarded for losing. So it appears someone from ESPN tweeted out that contract of not reseeding is probably set for the next 2 years. Nothing is set for the playoff in 2026. So I would like to see them address that if they can. Like you gotta find a way, or maybe that's the reward for a team getting to that point is it's easier on their fans to figure out the travel and it's not as expensive because the fact that you have a legitimate disincentive to be the number one overall seed is fundamentally wrong.
I'm not saying that you're wrong about who gets to play who, but they don't measure it on fair. They measure it on money. You know that as well as I do.
Yeah.
Your argument is a different argument. Let's be clear here. And I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying I know how the committee works. I know how, especially the bowls work. The only thing they ever cared about was getting 1 versus 2 in the BCS era, and then the highest dollar for everybody else. They cared zero about anything else. That was it. So that's kind of the continuation of that, but we have 12 instead of 2.
Yeah, I was glad they didn't drop Penn State too far.
They played pretty well. I mean, they had.
I thought they played great. But that Oregon defense, that Oregon defense is no joke. Absolutely, they have got NFL guys littered all over that side of the ball, especially up front. That Penn State offensive line manhandled the Oregon front four. It was It was not, they ran for 292 yards. That was more than the previous three opponents combined had run for against the Oregon defense. And Penn State went for 292 on the ground. I was really impressed. And so I'm glad that they were able to get a home playoff game. But if you're Ohio State, you have to be looking around going, wait a minute. You get SMU, who's a good team. I don't think as good as Tennessee. I don't think they've had as impressive of a season. I mean, Tennessee's loss at Arkansas is certainly not spectacular. But if you ask me who would I rather play at home, SMU or Tennessee, I'd rather play SMU. Penn State gets that draw. Ohio State gets Tennessee. But Ohio State won at Penn State in the regular season. It's a predicament. It's a predicament when you have these conference championship games.
Well, Ohio State not only lost to Michigan, the way they lost and how horrific they were on offense just killed them. They're lucky to be playing a home playoff game because they scored 10 points in that game. So they were just kind of forgotten about this weekend. Like they didn't even exist, which is bizarre on conference championship weekend. When's the last time they weren't in the Big Ten championship game? I don't remember what year it was. So
I think it was last year.
Wait a minute. Did they not make it last year?
Yeah, because it's been Michigan. Because remember there were divisions.
Oh, that's right.
They've had the divisions. So Michigan smoked Iowa and Purdue the last two seasons of the Big Ten championship game. But I understand the point you're making. Is it strange?
Yeah, Ohio State should be in it,
right?
Especially in a year there's no divisions. They got zero reason not to make it because they have the most talented roster, arguably in college football. And I think they were penalized for not even sniffing their potential.
They weren't. Not even close. The ceiling of Ohio State is still in there. That football team exists.
That's why the playoffs so wild and it's so entertaining.
What we learned about Ohio State is their floor is a lot lower than we thought.
What did we say earlier in the show? They value consistency. Where's Ohio State? 8th. Penn State.
Been more consistent.
Yep. That is something I think we can take away moving forward. Now, every year the committee is a little different. Granted, but at the same time, I would imagine that that's probably something that's going to be seen moving forward.
Okay, here's the next problem, Brian, and I think you're going to agree with me on this one. Automatic bids resulting in buys for conference champions, freaking ridiculous. I mean, if you want to have an automatic bid, like you win a conference championship, you're one of the 5 highest, you get into the playoff, fine. I've got no problem with that. In no world should Boise State number 1 be ranked ahead of Arizona State. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And second of all, the idea that you have a Boise State or even an Arizona State getting a bye over some other teams, I just don't agree with the auto bid structure that has been in place. I think auto bids across the board are terrible. Conference championships should be an opportunity to bolster your resume and how you are viewed by the committee. It should not automatically lock you into anything because I think these conferences are indeed closer competition-wise than they have been in the last couple of seasons, but that doesn't mean that they are on the same level. It doesn't mean every schedule for a conference champion is created the same way because it is absolutely not. I think that's the second thing that I look at and go, this has just got to go.
I know I discussed this with you off air the other day, but they're trying to do everything they can. Again, it's advertising and dollars. They want every region of the country not only to be represented, but towards the top. They don't want to tick off anybody. They want all the fans from everywhere to be happy. You can't do it and get the right teams in the top.
Just be happy with being in the playoff.
Well, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but living in different parts of the country, everybody's got a different opinion about it. But again, you can't, no offense to Boise, but like this is a stat that I pulled up. They came in 120th in the nation this year in passing plays allowed of 20 or more yards. They gave up 47. Texas gave up less than half that, 22. Indiana, 22. Like Tennessee, 30. You can't give up those kind of passing plays and have a defense that I'm going to expect you to do well in big games. I just don't think Boise State's one of the top 12 teams, but because they're worried about getting sued, antitrust, that's the one I'll let the committee off the hook for letting them in, but giving them a bye?
Ridiculous.
That's the separation. I completely agreed. I put up a post earlier today about this. You can't have those kinds of teams. Like Georgia's a weird situation. We can get into that too, because it's obvious that Carson Beck is not even remotely healthy. I think his season is done. That's my guess. His arm was dangling as he walked out onto the field last night for that last play. That's unfortunate. I hope I'm wrong, but they still get the 2 seed too. Like there's a lot of weird stuff that can happen, and that one's kind of an oddity, but you can't tell me that Boise State should be there at all. I mean, there's just no way I'm buying that. And Arizona State, like they had a good year.
They had an awesome year.
But are they the 4th best team in college football?
No, they're the 4th seed. They don't have the 4th best resume.
What I mean. They're not. Where would you rank them? Just straight up out of the 12, where would you put them? Somewhere between
probably
8 and 12, I assume.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go any lower than 12, and I was not going to go higher than. I probably would land on 9, because I one thing you have to consider with regards to quarterbacks and hypotheticals, which we all love talking about in college football, of course.
That is true.
Is Arizona State had one of their 2 losses come without their starting quarterback. So
yeah, the Cincinnati game, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Cincinnati game, Jeff Sims started. But with Sam Leavitt back there, they have 1 loss, and it's a fine loss on the road against 8-4 Texas Tech. That's the only time that they lost all season. They ran through the best of the Big 12. They just blasted Iowa State. So I'd absolutely have them as a top 10 team in the country. And Kenny Dillingham I guess this is what coaches do now. Is you just go on Twitter and lobby for your school. And like, if I'm a fan base, yeah, that's what I'd want to see. I want my coach out there fighting for school and trying to make every positive perception of the program that you can. But yeah, I'd probably have Arizona State in the 8 to 12 sort of range. Like I put them on par with Indiana. I think those 2 programs right now are very, very similar. I think you put them on the same field, it's a highly competitive football game. But hypotheticals also don't mean a lot to me, because hypothetically, Ole Miss beats Kentucky. Hypothetically, Bama beats Vandy. Hypothetically, Bama beats Oklahoma, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, yeah, the reseeding and the auto bids, I can't get behind.
The second one will get fixed. The first one I don't see.
Yeah.
If you come up with something on that,
although one final thought on the regionality thing and television networks being able to pull all of these strings and whatnot. What's the most watched game in college football every year? Michigan, Ohio State. It's the most watched every single. Those teams are from the same part of the country.
They also have 2 of the largest alumni bases in the world.
If you put Alabama, Georgia on the same television screen, it's not going to hit every market per se. It's going to get a big television number though, because those are 2 of the most watched teams.
New York. They get New York watches the Big Ten.
Right, but
that helps a lot. Like the South is nowhere near as populated. That hurts.
I'm not a television expert, so maybe or I'm not an executive, I should say. No, well, technically not an expert either, but maybe knowing more than the average layperson. At least I try to. We have one more thing to talk about on today's show. One of the Power 4 head coaching vacancies has been filled. No, it's not Rich Rodriguez going to West Virginia. It's Barry Odom. He's done at UNLV. He's off to Purdue, and he's got a long road ahead of him. That's coming up next. First, a reminder, this episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Not 2, 3, or 4. It's #1. Right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Do you want to bet college football? Do you think you know how these playoff games are going to go? Well, you put your money where your mouth is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Barry Odom is the new head coach at Purdue. That's not going to be an easy thing to do. This recruiting segment brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. That's Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider, joining me here on the show still all day today. Hope you're enjoying it. I know I certainly am. But I like Barry Odom. Brian, I think this has been a really good redemption spot for him at UNLV. Back-to-back appearances in the Mountain West Championship game at a program that you just don't win. But man, he's going to a place in Purdue where they've had success in the past, but that is a talent-deficient roster in more than one way, and building up the talent profile there, I don't know how easy that's going to be in West Lafayette.
I have a really strong suspicion that he knows that because Indiana is a doormat program, their rival, but it's not right now. Notre Dame's Notre Dame, but it's even up for Notre Dame right now. Michigan looks like they're rebounding, and you still got Penn State and Ohio State. Illinois is up. This is not exactly prime territory to go into Purdue and expect to recruit well.
No.
I mean, right now might be the worst time in my life, and I'm 51. It's not a good number. So good luck to him, and I'm sure he's going to get paid even if he gets fired in a few years. But right now, I can't imagine what Purdue did to lure him because I wouldn't touch that job for anything because it'd just be so hard. That is a really difficult gig.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate here for a moment because I agree that it's tough. But you have the opportunity to be a head coach at a Big Ten school, you got to take it. You could have said the same thing very feasibly about Indiana, Brian, and look at what Curt Cignetti's done. He might be the national coach of the year in college football. Maybe it'll be Kenny Dillingham. Like there are some good candidates out there for national coach of the year. Those two guys certainly, though, should be in the running. But Cignetti took that job, and now look at his coaching profile. And now he's got a home there. And it's not as if Purdue doesn't have fans that you're going to be able to get to home games.
They got loyal fans. They do.
Yeah, you've got a good fan base there. That's something. It's not everything. I hear you on it's the number 3 program in the state of Indiana. It's not a huge blue blood for recruiting in the Big Ten footprint. And by the way, you've got Oregon in the conference now, the conference champions, and they can recruit literally anywhere in the country, including right in your backyard, along with everybody else. So the talent acquisition is going to be hard. I don't know if he can pull a Curt Cignetti and just load up this roster with transfers, but I think what Barry Odom is thinking here, Brian, is, hey, if I turn this job around, or if I turn this program around from what it is, 1-11, if I go 6-6 next year, how good does that make me look as a head coach? How successful do other people view me as a head coach, and how capable do I look if I go into Purdue that is down and was the worst team in Power 4 football this year? They correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, Florida State. Oh. Florida State and Purdue should play in a bowl game. They really should. But anyway, among one of the 2 worst teams in all of Power 4 this year, if you go in and turn this around, if you're the guy to do that, that says a lot about what you can do. And by the way, UNLV was a crap job. UNLV wasn't getting players. They've got talent in their backyard, but everybody goes and recruits Vegas at Bishop Gorman and Liberty High School. Like, he was able to do it there. So if he does it at Purdue, I think that's pretty darn impressive.
That is an interesting job. Here's a little something. Cignetti, if I remember right, when he came over, brought 13 players with him. And I believe
from James Madison?
Yeah, from
it was a lot.
I want to say 6 to 8 of them started. Now, I have no idea how many seniors Barry had with him with the running Rebs, but a few will probably, hey, I want to go to the Power 4. They might move up. But I want to say it was 13. It was a high number. Indiana didn't have a shot if he didn't do that. Now, he's still a really good coach, and he picked the right quarterback and all that.
13 from James Madison.
I mean, that changed the roster. So everybody knew the system and all that. We may not see something like what Cignetti did, and hats off to him, by the way. He's done a tremendous job. But now that everybody's seen film of them and everybody knows they're not going to be taken as lightly, that becomes harder. That'll be another fascinating point. And I'm sure Purdue would love to get there. They need an incredible portal class. My first question is, where's your NIL? Indiana ponied up for their – they've got really good football facilities. They really do.
Their stadium is beautiful.
They have some mega donors at the IU programs where I went to school. They got some money. John Cougar, Mellencamp, all kinds of people donate there.
Yes, the singer John Cougar Mellencamp. You heard Brian correctly.
Yes, and John goes to the games and hangs out. He lives in the Bloomington area. Blah blah blah. That's different. Purdue. I mean, they put people in the seats there, but I don't think their facilities are where some of the others in the Big Ten are. And again, like you said earlier, it's the 3rd team in the state of Indiana, and Indiana is about 8 players deep. They can play at Ohio State or Michigan or Notre Dame or something on a yearly basis, and that's pushing it. So where is Purdue getting their players? They're going to have to be incredible at evaluating the portal, which is possible. But if you miss, like Florida State, I know because I cover them, they missed this year on the portal badly. They went from a team that was 13-1 to 2-10. If you miss and your recruiting hasn't been good, which Purdue's No offense, it's not good. They have a chance to be a 3-win team next year again, like that kind of level of team. So
3 wins would be an improvement from this year.
I know, but I mean, I'm trying to be nice here. But
yeah. Yeah. So the last 1-11 takeover that's been successful that everyone knows about, of course, is Colorado. There's another one that's had, I'll say, mild success in the Big Ten. That's David Braun at Northwestern. And
good coach.
I think David Braun's a pretty solid coach. Northwestern wasn't great this year, but Northwestern in his first full season went from 1 win to 8 wins, and it was the most under-the-radar turnaround that nobody talked about. They were seeded this year kind of back to what you'd expect in this new 18-team Big Ten conference, and I think that's a big part of the challenge for Purdue. And, you know, the national commentary I've heard on this so far about Ryan Walters being fired is he wasn't given a fair shake, he wasn't given enough time, they're not overly committed, and I don't know all the details of it. I know they were in the Big Ten championship game 2 years ago. Granted, that's when they had divisions. You still had to go 8-4, and they are a far, far cry from going 8-4. In this year, they were not close to that last year either. I think last year you could understand it. They had 4 wins, but you would have liked to see them at least be in that same sort of range. But it was such a massive regression. I mean, they lost to Oregon State, Brian. They lost to Oregon State. Didn't make a bowl game this year. And they lost to they beat Purdue pretty soundly in the non-conference slate. So Purdue was just really, really bad. And I think this takes at least 2 to 3 years for Barry Odom to get it right. But with what they just did with Ryan Walters, there's a question of how long is that leash going to be?
I think you'll have an advantage. And I know this sucks, but money's come up in this show. You're paying a buyout. You don't want to pay 2 while you're paying another.
That's a good point.
That's just reality. I don't know what the terms are for Barry. I don't know how many years, but I'll bet you money that Purdue's more likely to be lenient with him just because they don't want to pay an extra buyout while paying another coach they bring in after Barry. So I think 3 years, barring him going like 1-11 the next 2 seasons, is probably likely. They're probably going to need, their roster is not a Big Ten roster right now.
No.
They, if I remember right, somebody did the math on this. The top 5, and their schedule was not friendly. By the way, playing out of conference against Oregon State and Notre Dame is not helpful at Purdue.
Not helpful. No.
Especially Notre Dame.
And they got Oregon State. They got Oregon State when the Bees were playing well and when they were healthy, and then Oregon State faded off as the season went along.
But like the top 5 teams on their schedule, they got outscored something like 220-17.
It was ugly.
Yeah,
they weren't just losing. Indiana beat them to a pulp the last week in a rivalry game. I think that was probably the final straw. I think if Ryan Walters is competitive in that game, maybe he gets.
Yeah, I think it was 28-13, and it was a a good game.
Maybe you find that.
It was never a game at all.
No, was literally never close. So tough job. I'm interested. I also don't have super high hopes or expectations that he's going to suddenly turn around. You're going to look up and he's going to do an Indiana-type turnaround. But we didn't see Indiana coming until they arrived. Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network, brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. He also does Locked On Sun Devils. Brian, appreciate it as always.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.